Hello and welcome to Pics and Portraits. We are back with another animated feature from the past, this time looking at Ralph Bakshi's Spicy City. This is a crossover with Century of Schlock, our Patreon exclusive series looking at trash media from the 20th century. There's a new episode up now, so if you're into animated smut, please consider supporting us, patreon.com/Pics and Portraits. Speaking of animated smut, Spicy City is full of it. This show was produced in 1997 and was created by Ralph Bakshi, who rose to prominence in the early 1970s with an adaptation of R. Crumb's comic strip, Fritz the Cat. This was the first animated feature to be rated X, denoting it was for adults only. Bakshi would become known for his boundary-pushing adult animation. At a time where seemingly only major studios could afford to produce animated features, he managed to do so independently, and this let him get away with much more than he would have otherwise. Later in the decade, he moved towards fantasy and sci-fi with 1977's Wizards. Seeing this and his previous work, Spicy City makes perfect sense. It premiered the same year as Todd McFarlane's Spawn and is very similar in tone. Producers were looking for an animated series specifically for adults, and as such, it's very edgy. It's HBO, they can swear, and so we get excessive fucks and plenty of sexually suggestive situations. This series apparently grew out of talks to adapt Trey Parker and Matt Stone's Christmas short, Jesus vs. Santa. To see how that worked out, check out a South Park video, but ultimately, HBO had to settle for Ralph Bakshi, which, if I do say so myself, is a great consolation prize. This was not Bakshi's first foray into television. He had gotten his start in TV animation and more recently had created The New Adventures of Mighty Mouse. Though it caused some controversy, viewers believed in a scene Mighty Mouse was railing lines, but this was considerably still more wholesome than his other work. As such, Spicy City somewhat marked a return to form. It is an anthology series that explores the darker side of a futuristic city. Each episode is hosted by the sultry Raven, and these stories are rooted in the noir genre, so hard-nosed detectives, double crosses, that sort of thing. It can be filed under the cyberpunk aesthetic, which was huge in the 90s. I think the best way to describe the show was if Blade Runner was written by a horny teenager. As far as I can tell from a newspaper in an episode, it appears the year is 2097, which makes sense given that that is 100 years from production. Where they see the future going is somewhat more restrained than others we've looked at. Personally, one of the most entertaining aspects of the show is seeing their predictions as to where the internet would go. It was common for speculative fiction to present the internet as a virtual world you could jack into, complete with custom avatars. As a reminder, here's the state of the internet in 1997. What they imagined would take another 6 or 7 years to become reality with Second Life. It's very quaint considering what can be done with it today, but one detail I love, that it is seemingly based off of 56K, so anything that takes place in the virtual world is slower with more limited animation. I think that's a great touch. As it takes place in the seedy underbelly of a city, most of the stories take place in bars staffed with robots. We see familiar staples like flying cars and laser guns, genetic cloning, but rather than cell phones, we get these weird floating video screens, which is pretty conspicuous for gangsters. However, given the title and tone, a lot of the advancements focus on sex. Another is this weird sex projection machine that's used for blackmail, and one episode follows a human sex worker as she tries to compete with virtual girls. These VR brothels are full of women whose data and lives have been stolen, which is probably the most interesting episode, Sex Drive. For such a short series, there is quite a bit of same-sex relationships, which is nice to see, though ultimately this queerness feels exploitive. It's really just fetishizing lesbianism, to be honest. Another criticism I have is that the tech they predict is extremely outdated. There are still CDs and cassettes, and the computer designs leave a lot to be desired. However, the series ends with a virus outbreak and quarantine, so maybe they were onto something. This would be Bakshi's last major work until 2015's The Last Days of Coney Island. I am a fan of Bakshi. His 70s work really reminds me of my dad, but this animation lacks the character of those films. I know he only directed 2 episodes, but I find the whole series tries too hard to be polished and loses some of what I think makes him so special. But I'm not going to lie, it has been nice to get away from optimistic futures for once towards something a little more relatable. All 6 episodes are available here on YouTube. I will link in description. Let me know what you think. If you enjoyed this video, give us a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't, and again, if you can, please consider supporting us on Patreon, patreon.com/Pics and Portraits. We have a ton of exclusive stuff over there, obviously Century of Schlock. That's also where Sleepcore is now. It is free, so check that out if you haven't already. As always, thank you so much for interest in this channel, and thanks for watching. Stay safe out there.